Dr. Sellers, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in the Orangeburg Massacre?
Well, I had come to Orangeburg after serving about 7 years on the front line of the civil rights movement. I was in Mississippi in Selma, I was in Birmingham, I was in Jackson, Mississippi, and had been involved and engaged in a lot of the protest marches, the march from Selma to Montgomery, the Mississippi Meredith March, and even the March on Washington. That's how far I go back. And I decided to come back because it was time for me to go back to school and do some other things other than being on the front lines. And I'm talking about a deadly, violent period in the history of America, especially towards civil rights workers and voter rights workers and human rights workers. So I decided to come and finish school. I withdrew from Howard my sophomore year to go to Mississippi in 1964. And so it was time for me to go back, so I decided I was going to come back to South Carolina State College at that time. And so I moved in across the street from the campus on Broadway. And I began to work with the students the year before, during the period of the cause. I served as a kind of counselor, consultant, and they were very successful in getting the president changed at the college, which is something that had been tried by students for about 10 years, and they were finally able to make the case to, at that point, the Governor McNair. And so I had begun to set up what I call the Black Awareness Coordinating Committee, and what we were trying to do is just make students more conscious of their history and who they were and their origin and
how were you
so
doing
much
that?
history. We were doing that through speakers that we would bring to the campus. We were doing that with hairstyles. We were doing that with different pieces of African artifacts. But the most important way is education.
Right.
And so you begin to see the onslaught of dance groups, and you begin to see people talk about African history and languages and all that kind of thing. So we were trying to get people to know that Africans weren't born in the cotton field. I mean, there was a long, rich history before we even got to America of kingdoms and surgeries and civilizations and all that kind of thing, and refute that whole old knowledge about African Americans had done nothing positive and good for America, when in fact that was not the case.
Would you consider this somewhat a revolutionary period?
I think it was a change period, not quite revolutionary, but we certainly changed some systems that had been in place for a long period of time. Like with segregation, there was something called segregation etiquette. And that means that you had, as a black male, you had certain things that you had to follow. If you saw a group of a family walking towards you, you had two options. One is to get off the sidewalk altogether. The other one was to look down at the person's feet, because you weren't supposed to make direct eye contact, because making direct eye contact meant that you were belligerent and that you could actually be arrested for that, you could be beaten for that, any number of things could happen to you. But there was always a punitive action that went when you violated some of the segregated policies and procedures. So those were the kinds of things. And then if you spoke to them, even if it was like a 3-year-old toddler and all, you would have to use Miss when you call her name and the whole name. Now you would be Bo or Boo or whoever they wanted to call you, or whatever they wanted to spook or whoever. And the N-word was common, and so these were the kinds of things that people learned. If I went to a white person's house, I wasn't supposed to go to the front door at all. I'd go around to the back door and knock, and they would come out and probably say or tell us whatever it is that we were supposed to provide them. But those were some of the rules that were just so restrictive and oppressive and And then the kind of work that was available was also that way. So we were under probably the cruelest kind of system of slavery, and then segregation, and the oppression and the violence and all those kinds of things. And then I'd gone to Mississippi the summer of 1964, and Mississippi was the most hostile state in the Union toward African Americans. Matter of fact, a minister with SCLC actually say that nobody knows how many black folk and black men had been murdered in Mississippi and thrown in the rivers. That was the common way to dispose of a body, just like Emmett Till. And so people would just go missing, and people would say they got him, and life would go on there.
Okay, I wanted to know your views on the Kent State shooting.
The state of South Carolina came in and put a cover on it, and they hushed it up. It wasn't in any history books in South Carolina. Historians were discouraged from doing anything with it. The state said don't do anything with it.
So
we got it locked down.
why do you think that the Kent State shootings are more widely known than
Because the Kent State shootings went up, and when they came, and people were just alarmed that you would have police on the campus with students. That's a no-no. Everybody who's been around colleges and universities knows that.